Hello and welcome to our statewide staff meeting, a deep dive into one of the learning sequences from our units of work for the new Modern Languages K-10 syllabus. I'm Renetta Wolfe and joining me today is my colleague Victoria Hay. During the session, we will quickly revise the key aspects of the new syllabus. Then we will take a deep dive into a learning sequence from our Stage 4 French unit of work, allowing you to see exactly how our support for the new syllabus is what we call pick up and teach, and follows a backward mapping approach. For generations, the Aboriginal people of Australia have used storytelling, ceremonies, and traditional crafts to pass on knowledge. This exchange represents more than a process of teaching and learning, as Aboriginal knowledge and cultural practices are woven into the landscape and history of the people and form an essential part of shaping community identity. As language teachers, we can find similarities in the way we pass our knowledge and stories onto our students to preserve the legacy of language that we have been gifted and leave for future generations. Today, I am presenting from the lands of the Wiradjuri in Bathurst at the foot of the famous Wahlu, also known as Mount Panorama. Let's start with a quick review of the new syllabus. We must consider the aim of the syllabus when programming for our students. Think about how you can empower students in your classroom and what contributes to effective communication. Ultimately, we want students to choose languages as an elective. So the third dot point here is highly significant. Does anyone know what the words are behind the navy rectangle? Feel free to type your answers in the chat. I'll give you a little minute to type your answers. And of course, I can't see the chat, so how are we going? Did anyone?
We haven't got a response yet.
Oh, all right. Well, I'll let everyone know this answer.
Appreciation.
Appreciation, yes.
Yeah.
Enthusiasm.
Very close.
Enthusiasm is another one.
Yes, that's very close too.
Appreciation.
They are
and
interest
enjoyment.
and enjoyment. So everyone's on the right track. Now, here is the overview of the Modern Languages K-10 syllabus. Do you know the central goal represented by the red line? Again, feel free to answer in the chat. What's the word behind those question marks?
Yes.
We have
Danielle,
communication. Very
Yes.
good, Danielle.
Yes, it is communication. So you can see that the three main focus areas are interacting, understanding texts, and creating texts. Students achieve these focus area outcomes through applying knowledge of language systems and developing intercultural capability. Each focus area has its own stage-based outcomes and content. Here you can see the outcome and content for Stage 4 interacting. For all outcomes, the content is considered essential learning for students to meet that outcome. You can vary the amount of time you spend and depth you provide on each, depending on the needs of your students. As you can see, interacting is primarily through oral language. In designing our support, we noticed that the interacting outcomes were the most challenging. Interacting focuses on exchanging and negotiating meaning, and negotiating is a key word here. It means there is a level of spontaneity and/or unknown in each interaction. which students need to navigate in order to interact successfully. With careful scaffolding, students can interact from the very beginning of stage 4. It may not look like a conversation, but it will look like an interaction, and we'll show you some examples today. Here is the stage 4 understanding texts outcome and its corresponding content headings and content dot points in stage 4. I'll let you read those. And these are the content headings and content dot points for the creating texts outcome in stage 4. Please note that creating texts applies to spoken, written and multimodal texts. You will see when we do our deep dive into a learning sequence for stage 4 French that we have addressed a variety of content dot points from each outcome to showcase what they look like in the classroom. The content for each outcome is over a whole stage of learning. So in each outcome, you will see a dot point which relates to using vocabulary from a range of themes. Remember, each time you contribute to this breadth of themes, you are addressing this content. You can type questions today into the chat at any point during today's meeting, and we'll also allow time at the end for you to come off mute and ask questions. So now that we have looked at outcomes and their content dot points, I'll now hand over to Victoria to do our deep dive into a learning sequence from our stage 4 French unit of work. So I'm going to stop sharing, Victoria.
Thank you, Renetta.
I think. Yeah, you've already taken.
Thanks, Renetta. Remember that the syllabus is a framework for all modern languages. So even though we're looking at French today, the content is applicable for all modern languages. Before we do our deep dive into a learning sequence from our stage 4 French unit of work, it is important to remember our backward mapping approach to planning a unit of work. Step 1, identify learning goals and outcomes. Step 2, determine measures of success. Step 3, plan instruction. Today we're exploring the first lesson sequence from the stage 4 French unit of work, which is designed for term 2. In term 1, students learned greetings and introductions, learned how to say simple likes and dislikes, and learned to talk about their families. This is the assessment task for the term 2 unit, which determined the learning activities and formative assessments we developed as we backward mapped. It's a 2-part task, with the first part assessing understanding texts and the second part assessing creating texts. We organise our units of work into sequences of learning which break down aspects of the final summative task into learning sequences, each with its own clear learning intentions and success criteria. By chunking the learning in this way, with each sequence of learning building towards a particular aspect of the final task, students are supported to develop the necessary skills to succeed at the summative task. The summative task for Stage 4 French requires students to read emails from prospective host families and identify the most appropriate family for them, and write an email to one of the families with a self-introduction, reasons for choosing the family, and a description of where they live. So we've broken the unit into the following learning sequences: where I live, details about my home and its layout, the local area. These are the learning intentions and success criteria for the first learning sequence, as well as the vocabulary and grammatical structures to be covered. And this is the mini task for formative assessment that students will complete at the end of this learning sequence. This is an interacting task where students take on the role of a real estate agent and interact with the buyer to purchase one of the homes. You will notice this mini task includes content from Term 1, as it's always good to revisit prior learning. In today's presentation, we will unpack the learning activities from the first sequence of learning, which build to this mini task, show you the alignment of each activity to the syllabus content, and show you the link between the learning sequence and the final summative task. We will then allow you some time to practice aligning activities to content in smaller groups. The first learning sequence is called Where I Live. It is broken down into describing where I live, describing the home. This is the first activity in the learning sequence, which introduces students to the unit. Its purpose is to kick off the anchor chart for the unit. Anchor charts are a place where, as a class, you can store the content introduced in the teaching activities, for example, vocabulary, expressions, and grammatical language structures. They can be written as a hard copy to post in the classroom or on a digital platform such as Padlet or Jamboard. And here is a possible example for Stage 4 French unit of work. This is what occurs next, and we've included the structures in blue. Students revise how to say where they live from Term 1. They then learn the compass points so they can give more detail about where they live. In this activity, students ask and answer where they live in Australia and where things are located. Students then link their learning to the French context by saying where towns are located in France using a map. An important aspect of our approach to teaching and learning activities when choosing them is aligning them with the content dot points from the syllabus. At the end of most teaching activities, we have added the most relevant content dot point or points. These are taken from the relevant outcomes, and you'll see we've also included the codes. These are the content dot points and related outcome codes for these activities. Sound symbol correspondence in the content dot points here refers to the relationship between the letters and the sounds they make when pronounced. The sound system is the phonological component of the language, including intonation, pronunciation, stress, and in Chinese, tones. Whilst numerous syllabus content dot points may be relevant here, we have focused on the one or two with the strongest alignment to ensure we are covering the full range of syllabus content. This is not required when programming a unit for work, but we found it very helpful in our process. Not every activity will have a content dot point, as is the case for the first activity of the learning sequence on the previous slide. By cross-checking the activities and their related content dot points, we were able to evaluate if our tasks and activities covered a range of required skills. You may not always agree with the content dot points we've chosen, and that's okay. The nuances we all have in our pedagogy and the tweaks we make to suit our context may impact the content dot point alignment. These are the next activities: a listening activity, where students identify where towns are located in France, and an information gap activity, which is an excellent way to address the interacting outcome. In this activity, students interact in pairs to identify where each person lives in France or Australia. Student B has information that student A does not have, indicated by yellow crosses on the maps, and vice versa. So they must interact to find out the required information. Remember, interacting means there is a level of spontaneity and/or unknown in each interaction, rather than rote learnt speech, and information gap activities do this really well. Students are provided with a scaffold for their interaction, which introduces the words for house and apartment. This enables students to become familiar with these two words before they are explicitly taught later in the unit. Reminding ourselves of the mini-task for this learning sequence, you can see these activities support students to describe where the home is located. Back to the learning sequence. We then introduce additional vocabulary and structures for types of homes and more detail about where homes are located, using images which are presented on a PowerPoint. For example, where do you live? I live in an apartment in the suburbs. Using the images in the PowerPoint as stimulus, students create sentences orally. Next,
Victoria, you've accidentally muted yourself. So
I'm back, sorry. How much did you miss?
So from the start of this slide.
Oh, okay, thank you. To practice describing where they live, students write sentences to match each image, then add more detail to the sentence. They then read out their best sentences to a partner and play a game of Snap with cards provided. You'll notice we have embedded a lot of games in our units of work, as they support students to socialise with peers and interact in a low-stakes environment. When playing this game, students must say the phrase in French for snap, and then the correct French phrase to match the card. In this way, this activity addresses the socialise with peers content dot point in interacting, and also the creating text dot point of using the grammar system through the sentences students create in the first activity. Students then complete a listening activity, identifying details about where people live, addressing this understanding text content dot point. In this unit, students complete a range of Conti-Smith activities to practice vocabulary and structures about where you live. Partial dictation, faulty echo, Communicative drill. And find someone who. In this activity, each student is given a card with fictitious details about themselves written in French. In this case, they are given a name, age, details about their siblings, what they like and where they live. All students then go around the class asking each other questions. In this case, they would ask in French, what is your name? How old are you? What do you like? Do you have siblings? And where do you live? Then, when they find someone who matches the description on the table they have been given, they write that student's fictitious name next to the description. They continue until they have found someone who matches each description. And these are the content dot points this activity addresses. Before moving to the next activity of the learning sequence, I want to point out that you will see Conti-Smith activities in our units of work as they reflect current language teaching pedagogy consistent with the intent of the syllabus, where communication is the central goal. Their approach focuses on the importance of listening in developing second language acquisition, using as much meaningful target language content as possible, making sure students have lots of opportunities to practice speaking the target language, selecting and sequencing grammar and vocabulary that does not overload students and focuses on high frequency use of language, translation activities playing a vital role, and enhancing the ability to independently and spontaneously interact in real situations. With support from the sentence builder and from you, students are now able to write a paragraph such as the one on the slide, addressing this creating text dot point. Reminding ourselves of the mini task again, you can see students should now have the skills to do this third dot point in much more detail. Let's revisit the learning intentions, success criteria, and vocab and grammar for this first learning sequence. And you can see we've covered these aspects. So let's move on to the remaining learning intentions. Now we move to describing the home. This content is the vehicle for unpacking gender, definite and indefinite articles, and adjective agreement. We start off by showing images to explore different types of homes in France, identify and discuss how homes in France are different to those in Australia or the student's own culture or country, introduce common features of a home, asking, for example, what is it? And responding, it is a window. This activity addresses this interacting dot point. Next, students complete activities where they describe features of various houses and revise likes and dislikes. Which addresses this creating text content dot point. The reason we included likes and dislikes was to revise content from term 1. Remember to find every opportunity you can to revise and build on previous learning. Students then explore features of a blog. Discuss with students what a blog is, strategies to use when reading text for comprehension, including identifying language structures and vocabulary and using prior knowledge and cognates. This activity develops comprehension strategies to interpret information, opinions, and ideas in texts. Next, students explore a blog. Firstly, give students a list of rooms in English and see if they can identify the French in the blog post about Sophie in Canada. Then, independently, students complete the blog comprehension questions and then discuss as a class, addressing these understanding text content dot points. You can see from the number of content dot points this addresses that this is a rich task, which explicitly teaches comprehension strategies rather than just jumping in with comprehension questions. Building on the blog, the sequence then moves to explicitly teaching rooms and features of homes, such as gardens. Using a PowerPoint with images of different rooms and features, students practice the new vocabulary orally, asking and responding to simple questions, addressing this content dot point. Students then play a game of Beat the Teacher, another interacting game, a bit like Simon Says. You say a word aloud as you point to the room or feature on the PowerPoint. The students must repeat after you if you have used the word that identifies the room or feature correctly. If the word is different from the room or feature in the picture, they must remain silent to win a point. If the word doesn't match the picture and anyone in the class makes a sound, you take the point, and the first to 7 points is the winner. This activity addresses this understanding text content dot point. Next, show students a number of floor plans and introduce the is there a structure. Provide the modelled responses and then model description of one of the floor plans. Students then write a description of one of the other floor plans you have shown them. Next, students describe what there is in their own home using the modelled structures. This activity addresses these creating text content dot points. Lastly, as a class, view the French real estate website, exploring 1 to 2 homes on the page. Practice asking and answering what features the home has. Ask students to extend their response by using appropriate adjectives to describe individual rooms or features. This addresses this interacting content dot point. So back to our learning intentions, success criteria, and vocab and grammar for this first learning sequence, and you can see we've now covered all remaining aspects. Please take a moment to look at the mini task again. You can hopefully see that the learning activities completed in this sequence build students' skills to be able to complete this formative assessment task. And reminding ourselves of the summative end of unit task, you can see that we have already started to equip students with the skills they need to complete the task, as shown by the parts of the task which have been underlined. Like the mini task, we also revisit prior learning whenever we can. Looking at what we haven't covered in the first lesson sequence, you should be able to guess what would be in the next lesson sequence. For example, describing your neighbourhood and local places. We mentioned near the start of today's presentation that an important aspect of our approach to choosing teaching and learning activities in our units of work was to align them with content dot points from the syllabus. On the slide, you can see one of our working documents, which shows how much content we covered in just this one learning sequence across all three outcomes for stage 4. We're now going to get you to collaborate with each other in groups to practice aligning activities to the syllabus. Each breakout room will be provided with an activity from one of our stage 4 units. Our aim is to identify the relevant focus area or areas, stage 4 outcome or outcomes, and related content dot point or points from the Modern Languages K-10 syllabus for this teaching and learning activity. Understand what the content dot points look like in action, and collaborate to discuss how teaching and learning activities are developed or adjusted to align with the intention of the new syllabus. You will need access to the syllabus, particularly stage 4 outcomes and their related content, and the link to the collaboration Jamboard that we give you. Before we go to breakout rooms, we will model here the Jamboard task you will collaborate on. It is based on a stage 4 Italian teaching and learning activity. Students create a role play about eating at a restaurant in Italy and then swap with another student for peer feedback. Students read their role play aloud, paying attention to pronunciation and language use. Students discuss language used and how this can be applied to other situations and expanded upon or improved. Firstly, as a group, discuss the language and communication skills the students are using. In this case, socialising with peers, reciprocating information about food and drinks, asking questions, using correct pronunciation and intonation, and understanding content to give feedback. Also, please discuss the macro skills addressed. In this case, writing. Students are writing the role play, speaking, reading it aloud to the teacher, and reading peers' scripts for understanding. Next, choose a scribe to add to your group's response to the 3 sticky notes for each question on your Jamboard slide. The first 2 questions are on the blue sticky note. Which focus area or areas does this activity address? Interacting, understanding texts and/or creating texts. For this activity, it is creating texts and understanding texts. And what outcome does the activity address? For this activity, we've identified ML4, UND 01, understanding, and ML4 CIT01 creating texts. The students are reading aloud a conversation they've created, so it is not a spontaneous interaction and it does not align with the interacting outcome. Then the next question for your group is on the green sticky note. From the outcome or outcomes your group has identified, discuss and select the most relevant content dot point or points. For this activity, it is the content dot points you see on the green sticky notes, as students are reading and understanding their peers' role play scripts. And students are creating a role play using vocabulary about foods, drinks, adjectives for describing food, likes and dislikes. They are also using grammatical structures such as questions and answers and conjunctions. And the last sticky note for your group is the pink. How can you adjust this activity for students with a disability? And there's a couple of examples there.
So thank you for having a go and participating in that collaboration time. We really appreciate it. Here are the answers at a glance for each activity, which we will also share with you on our Term 4 statewide staff meeting Teams post. So we encourage you to also have a look at all the activities to deepen your understanding. These are the answers for the Chinese. And these are the answers for French, if you were doing the French activity. And these are the answers for Japanese, if your group was working on that activity. So before we conclude, I'd like to share with you some relevant support for your own programming. These can all be found on our Planning, Programming and Assessing Languages 7 to 10 page on our website. Our programming guidelines, assessment guidelines, unit of work guidelines and sample templates. And on this page, you will also find Stage 4 and 5 generic scope and sequences and units of work, and for Stage 4 French, Japanese, Spanish and Chinese, and Stage 5 French and Japanese. They are fully resourced, pick up and teach units of work and scope and sequences. So all those things you saw today are from our Stage 4 French. You can go and have a closer look or look at another language. We will soon be publishing our support for Stage 5 Spanish and Chinese as well. On our Languages New South Wales YouTube site, and I saw a lot of people asking in the chat if we would have a copy of this presentation. This is where you'll find it. You'll find recordings of all of our statewide staff meetings on implementing the new syllabus, as well as the recordings of the launch sessions for our Japanese and French support, and new syllabus how-to guides to show you how to navigate NESA's digital syllabus format. We also want to mention support materials that NESA have recently published for the new syllabus. You'll find them in the Teaching and Learning Support section of the digital syllabus. They include language-specific grammar guides and examples for teaching activities under content headings. The Languages and Culture team comprises the people you see on the slide. To make contact with the team directly, besides through Teams, Microsoft Teams, our contact details can be found on this section of our website. We warmly welcome your questions and feedback. Our team also oversees the Tunken Centre, where Mieko and Taka work. You can see them at the bottom right there. And lastly, we want to remind you of our networks, which again, you are very warmly invited to join. Our networks are where you can access face-to-face support for the new syllabus, and there are 19 of them across New South Wales. The meetings are held in week 7 or 8 each term and usually build on the content from the statewide staff meeting. Please see the contact details of our network leaders on our website if you would like to join. Thank you, everybody. That's the end of our presentation today, but feel free if you have any questions.